Before we jump into it, let me just talk about a couple of organizational matters, if I find them. All right, what's important? Oh yeah, everyone who submitted the first grade improvement task passed. Great job. There's nothing much I have to talk about when it comes to your research questions. Second grade improvement task is open now. You can check it out on Moodle. You will have to do a transcript based on an interview that you do. But all the details are available on Moodle for this. And you will have time until mid-June. What else? Oh yeah, next week there are no classes, right? Because Pfingsten, holidays. Tomorrow's exercise, that's important, they will be online. Okay, not in person. You will do them via Microsoft Teams. The links for the Teams rooms are also on Moodle. What else is important here? Oh yeah, registration for the exam is open now. So if you want to participate in the exam, like in the final report by the end of the semester, you have to register for your exams. Yeah. If you want to do it next semester, for example, you will get different data, but then you don't have to register now. But you have a lot of time, like the registration period is until maybe July or something. So it's a long registration period. But just as a reminder, if you want to take part in the final exam, you will have to register through TUM Online. Okay, anything else organizational-wise? Did I miss anything? What were we talking about last time? We ended with, what did we end? We started with designs, moved on to foundations. That's it, right? Oh yeah, what did you do in the last 2 weeks? What was the topics? Interviews, right? What did we learn in interviews? Like you did 2 different interviews. You did semi-structured and the other ones, narrative interviews. What's the difference? Yeah?
The narrative interview is more open and like they're telling a story and you don't really interject until they finish like their main story, I guess. And the semi-structured is more like you ask a question, they answer, and you continue in that pattern. It's more like specific questions.
So narrative is more open. Of course, the name says it, like you want a narrative, you want the story from them. I'm assuming, because I don't know much about this, that narrative interviews have less questions on the guide. Is that true? Or is it the same? Is less? I don't know. I'm just asking. Just in small talk. Okay. What else? Yeah, today, focus groups. This is the last, not directly the last, but sort of the last data collection method that we will talk about in this semester. Full disclosure, I never did focus groups myself. I had focus groupish situations while I was trying to do interviews, and I don't like focus groups. That's maybe not enough of a word. I hate focus groups, actually. The idea of them. I think the logistics of it might be a bit tough to handle, but maybe today I will learn some new things about focus groups that will I will change my mind on them. Now, you guys told me that you don't have any experiences with focus groups before. So by the end of this and by the end of tomorrow, you will have enough information to be able to conduct your own focus group in a small scale. It is part of a qualitative researcher's toolkit, so you need to know about it at least in theory. in practice, there are specific kinds of situations where we would choose focus groups over interviews, for example. But we will talk about this. This is the agenda for today. So first of all, we want to talk about what are focus groups, then when we use them and why we use them, then how to design and conduct them. And along the way, we will add a couple of information for research context and things like that. For example, the ethics documents when you do focus groups and qualitative research. Just a little background first. Focus groups are historically from the 40s, at least, that's what you will read most of the times, developed by Merton and colleagues. And in the beginning, they were mostly used for political research and market research, like the ones that you saw in the video in the beginning. Now, around the 90s, maybe more in the early 2000s, you had a lot more focus group research in other fields, different social science fields, and in the health sciences. But initially, like from the 40s onwards, you would have them always in combination with some sort of survey or some sort of quantitative research. And it would be more like a mixed methods sort of approach, but they didn't call it mixed methods back then. You would have something like a survey where you ask people certain kinds of quantitative questions, and then maybe you would take a subgroup of those people and ask them more in-depth questions within a focus group. But yeah, now it's a quite common method within health sciences as well. So what is a focus group? It is a method where data is collected from multiple participants at the same time. So with your interviews, you collect data from one participant, you have multiple participants at the same time. It is relatively unstructured. You still have some sort of a guide and a moderator who guides the discussion. But it is a moderator. It's not like in the video in the beginning where you ask a question and then you just talk to one person and mention the names of all the people within the room. It's not like that. It's more, it should be a discussion between people. Some sort of a debate should be going on. People should talk to each other within a focus group, within a good focus group. That's the idea of a focus group. Now, of course, with technology and stuff, traditionally you had focus groups, in-person focus groups. Nowadays you have a lot of different ways to collect focus group data virtually, online. During COVID you had a lot of focus group studies studies who used the focus group method, where they used, for example, Zoom or other kinds of software to collect data. So what is central to the method? What's the defining characteristic of the method is that there's sort of social interaction between group members. There's like a dynamic between them. And it's not just the dynamic between the researcher or the data collector and one participant, but there's like an ongoing dynamic between the people, like a social interactions are happening. In an ideal scenario, in a focus group discussion, your participants would ask each other questions too. They would challenge each other's thoughts. They would think about advantages and disadvantages of a certain thing. And sometimes focus groups have been seen, or this is like a advantage of focus group that you will find sometimes, as something that is more naturalistic. Naturalistic meaning that it's something that is closer to what occurs naturally within the social world, in some sense. At least more naturalistic than what you have in a interview. What do you think about that? Last point here. Are focus groups more naturalistic than interviews? Yeah?
It's still like an interview setting, right? Kind of. So I think it's also like the inclination is there to like just answer the same things everybody else is saying.
Could be.
Like a group, kind of. So,
Point on that?
I feel like social pressure can sort of change your answer so it would be less natural in an interview because maybe you less might be less assured.
Social pressure might change your answer, and that's why it would be less natural. Point on this?
I would also have thought of it maybe more naturalistic because like when you talk to different people and have like a discussion, maybe like participants forget at some point that they're in an interview setting and just like get into their discussions and want to discuss their points, and you get more information as you would get if you have a one-on-one interview. But that's just a guess.
So for you, it would be more natural because they're not just talking to one foreigner or one foreign person, one person stranger. That's the word I'm looking for. But they are sort of interacting with each other. That's what makes it more natural. And on the other side, we have the idea that it's less natural because it's sort of a still created situation, right? Because we create the situation, we put a sort of a fence around the situation, and that's what makes it sort of less naturalistic. Now, if we see it as naturalistic or more or less naturalistic, will often depend on our philosophical position, our thoughts around epistemology and ontology. And if we view things like, if we view a social situation as something that can be like true, or there's one type of social situation, and then we could argue, okay, this is either, yeah, it is more naturalistic or less naturalistic, or we could argue that this is just different. This is one of 100 different or endless, indefinite realities, depending on the position that we take. So a constructionist position, for example, would argue that it's just a different situation, not necessarily something more or less naturalistic. And within your work, you have to address the context of the situation. And I feel like in interviews, you talked about context, right? So I'm assuming this was a topic, that everything within an interview has influence in some sense on your participant, right? What are the things that could influence an interview situation? What did you learn? What could influence an interview situation? Yeah.
Maybe how the room is like looking, like if there's like a lot of stuff going on in the room, like if you're alone or if you're like in the middle of a hall, as an example, or like time constraints, like if the person has like enough time or if it's like too long or too short.
Great points. So the material configuration of the room, where you are, it's like place, time constraints. It's like the basic idea of time and place, like context is always time and place. What else? Could be. Yeah.
Maybe also how like the interviewer is communicating to you. How the questions are asked in which like tone.
How the questions are asked, the content of the questions, the way we dress, the way other people dress. I don't know, maybe the weather even. Everything influences an interview situation. And if you add that up, or you think about this with relation to focus groups, it's the same. All of the things that influence an interview situation are things that influence a focus group situation as well. It is the time, it is the material configuration, it is the color of the walls, it is how we dress, it is the way we talk, it is the way the people talk to each other and how the people are dressed. All of these things are influences in an interview situation. Now, it's impossible, or Yeah, it depends on your philosophical position, what you'll answer. But most of the times it is very tough to sort of get a hold of the, sort of trying to make the situation as comparable as possible every time. I mean, if you have two different focus groups in the same room at the same time, with the same weather, the same temperature, if you have different people in there, it's still a different situation. And maybe you aren't dressed the same, or whatever it might be, whatever small detail. With regards to the idea of the social pressure that we talked about in focus groups, you could argue that you also have social pressure out there, like in the social world naturally. So maybe a focus group is just a reflection of a natural situation, but we don't know. It will depend on the philosophical position. Now, when and why should you or would you use a focus group? One thought is that you want to elicit a wide range of views, wide range of perspectives, wide range of understandings of an issue. That's something that's an advantage compared to an interview, because in an interview you will have the perspective of one person most of the time. And here you have the perspective of multiple people. If you want to explore an under-researched area, now this is applicable to all qualitative research, not only to focus groups. And if you want to access the views of underrepresented and marginalized social groups, now this is something also applicable to many different types of qualitative research. But we'll talk about this in a bit. Or now we will talk about this. There's always the idea of if sensitive topics should be discussed, or the argument of if sensitive topics should be discussed in focus group. Is this a place where you can discuss sensitive topics, or is it not a place where you can discuss sensitive topics? What you will find is that a lot of people say that focus groups can be suitable to explore different kinds of sensitive or personal topics, even in a environment, in a group environment. Topics like drug addiction, for example. And you will find a lot of studies, or not a lot of studies, you will find studies where researchers use focus groups to talk, for example, with children or young people together in a group. The idea being that the people are more comfortable discussing certain types of sensitive topic together rather than if they are alone with a stranger. This is the idea of sensitive topics. Now, what are your thoughts on this? Are there sensitive topics that you can't discuss in a focus group? Or let me ask differently. Which sensitive topics can you not discuss in a focus group? Tough question, right? Which sensitive topic can we not discuss in a focus group? Yeah?
I don't know, like, just, but maybe to be specific, for example, about like sexual abuse, stuff like that, like topics that are pretty much personal and where like there are a lot of trigger points. You don't know if like people are ready to discuss it with others.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't know how they react.
Yeah. Sexual abuse, for example, topics with a lot of different trigger points, trauma-related topics.
Yeah.
But would you say those would be, how would you collect data on this if not in a focus group?
Maybe
Secondary?
yeah, but that doesn't make sense because you probably don't get any data from psychotherapists.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah?
Maybe like, just get data to topics like that with people that are willing to talk about. Like, I mean, that you like ask, for example, who is willing to talk about like such a topic that are not kind of forced, or that they just know from the beginning what they're going to be asked.
Great idea. Like within an ethical approach, you would do some sort of a informed consent, ask them first, hey, or tell them what this is about, and this can be very sensitive. And if they are informed, they want to take part, then they can take part and discuss it. Discuss it even in focus groups. But of course, there's no way of saying that there's a specific topic that we can't handle with a certain type of data collection method. But we also always have to think about the specific context in which the topic is applied in, and the way in which we do it. Now, we have been talking about a focus group discussion where, for example, we are a stranger and collecting data on something. Well, we could also set up a focus group with people, with someone from the group which is affected by whatever topic we're talking about, and they could do the data collection in this, or play the moderator in this. Of course, if we have the resources, the funding, the budget, whatever. But it's also a possibility to handle this. Same for the interviews, same for any other kind of data collection method, but it's very important to have some sort of informed consent going on before we start with this. Okay, so there are some topics which they say are not suitable for focus groups, and where the use of individual interviews, for example, would be better. These are, one example for this is the experience of shyness. If you have people who are quite shy and want to, or introverted and they don't want to talk, for example, in groups or something like that. For this target group specifically, it might be better to use individual interviews or other data collection methods completely. Yeah, the second one, topics where there are likely to be strongly conflicting views, is also something where it is said that you rather don't use focus groups. But this is also related to the composition of your focus group, which we'll talk about in a bit, which people are in your focus group. But the topic of abortion would be an example for this. Also, if you want any kind of personal narratives, very in-depth stories like you would do with narrative interviews, it's tough to handle something like this in focus groups. Why? Because you want the dynamic within the group and people talking, and you can't, for example, follow up on a certain story if just one person mentions something like a story and you want to follow up on this. That's something that wouldn't work. It would sort of destroy the dynamic within the groups most of the times. And if you try to get data from busy professionals, it might be logistically challenging. So it's tough. For example, you are in a certain situation. Let's say you are in a hospital setting or something, and you are trying to do some sort of a focus group with a lot of people in management who have 1,000 different appointments going on at the same time. It's very tough to find a common appointment for everyone to be there and give you 2 hours of their time or something like that. That's one example here. Here are the advantages and disadvantages of the focus groups. A lot of these things will be also related to other qualitative research data collection methods, but let's go through a couple of these. The advantages would be flexibility in exploring unanticipated issues, because when you have a group dynamic, it is more likely, or likelihood might be the wrong word here, but it can be more common that you will get a lot of unanticipated thoughts, ideas, and issues compared to if you have just an individual interview. It might be that if you have an individual interview, you will only get the information that you're asking about and something close to it, but it doesn't go too far off. Now, on the other hand, it can be difficult to manage if you have a focus group going off the rails, like they're talking about a completely different topic and you try to steer them back. It's way tougher than in an interview, but it can be tough in an interview too, depending on who you are interviewing. Yeah, good for gathering new knowledge about issues little is known about. Yeah, again, this is applicable to a lot of different types of qualitative research. Then you have sort of access to the everyday ways people are talking about an issue. You will, depending on the composition of your focus group, you will have people talking about the topic very close to the language that they would use in every day. Okay, that's what is meant here. So they will talk about, I don't know, if we are in the hospital setting, they will use the same terminology that they use every day and at work in the hospital, depending on the composition of your group, if all of them are the managers in the hospital, for example. And it gives you access to interaction and meaning-making processes where you are sort of removed from it. Of course, you're part of it. If you are the moderator, you're part of it, but you still have more interaction going on and more types of meaning-making that's going on. It can facilitate disclosure. That's the point that we had before with the sensitive topics. Now, this is why I don't like them, because logistically, it's tough. I mean, logistically in terms of planning and organizing them, and also logistically in terms of getting all the people at the same time there, and also logistically in terms of moderating the conversation in and of itself. Therefore, it might be helpful, this is a recommendation that you find sometimes, that you get some sort of an assistant to manage practical matters, if you have, of course, the resources for it. Okay. Another advantage that they mention is that it can lead to some level of empowerment of participants of social change. If you have a group, for example, people who are activists in some sense, and you get them in the room together and they can sort of speak their mind and sort of address certain issues from different perspectives that might lead to empowerment and social change. Another big issue with it is transcription. Now, you will do transcription with your second grade improvement task, and it is already very time consuming to do transcription if you have like one individual interview that you're transcribing. Now within focus groups, that's a very tough one. It's a very, very tough one. Now you don't have to do like very hard transcription for your grade improvement task. You will do like 3 minutes based on interviews that you will conduct. But for focus groups, it's way tougher because you have the different speakers going on. Because you have multiple people in the room, the power dynamics are a bit different than if it was just one person in the room. It changes the power dynamic. They say it reduces it. We can say that it changes it for sure. And it is good for groups for whom research participation might be daunting. So if you have certain people who would never do an individual interview and talk to a researcher or something like that, they might be open to going with their friends or people they know to a room and talking about a issue. But it's more time consuming. That would be a disadvantage. Let's talk about composition of the group. So you can have heterogeneous groups and homogeneous groups. If you have a more heterogeneous group, you will have more different views, which is like one of the positive, one of the advantages of focus groups. You'll have more different groups and more like diverse discussions, hopefully, depending on how you handle, of course, the discussion. And if you have like more homogeneous groups, people who are similar in their backgrounds, like in terms of their identity or in terms of their occupation or whatever it might be, then you have a more familiar social environment where people are not, there's no barrier or less of a barrier when they talk to each other. It could be that they feel more comfortable then. So it is often like that homogeneity is favored, because then you have like the shared basis, then you have the less barriers while talking, but it will really depend on your topic and your research question of what you will do in the end. Now, just to give you an example how the homogeneous or heterogeneous group might look like, let's say you are exploring the problem of binge drinking. A homogeneous group would be something like school leaver students of the same gender and the same social class. And then a heterogeneous group would be mixed in terms of like gender, social class, age, and occupation, and all of these kinds of things. Again, in the end, the most important thing to choose when it comes to choosing everything, like your method and everything, but specifically for the focus groups, to choose if it's a homogeneous or heterogeneous group, it will depend on what you are looking at. What is the goal of your study? What are the research questions of your studies? Now, there's also the thought of, on two different levels, there's the thought of acquaintance, collecting data from acquaintances, friends, and things like that. First of all, in qualitative research is not that much of a problem if you do interviews or data collection or focus groups with people that you know before. Okay? If you have people that you know and they are part of a certain group that is of interest for your study, then it's totally fine if you interview them in your study, especially if you do a qualitative research thesis. And this is always a good starting point, for example, if you do some sort of snowball sampling or something like that, to have people from the group that you know personally, maybe start doing an interview with them. But this is not completely what is meant here. Here they talk about, like, you could do a focus group with people that you know from a certain group, but here they also talk about, like, are you interviewing friends, like people who know each other, who are part of the same social network? And it might be that if you interview people from a certain friend group, just think about your friend group, for example. If we put you together in one room, let you talk about a sensitive issue, it might be that they are less likely to disclose certain issues, ideas, stories, whatever it might be. And then there's the issue of confidentiality. If you do it with people from the same network, the argument is that if they are strangers, and they don't know anything about each other, then there's no way that they can disclose anything very specific. Now, it could also be, depending on the topic, if you have a group of friends, that it will be easier for them to talk to each other. If it's, for example, not a sensitive topic or a topic of conflict within the group or anything like that. No matter what you choose, they say that focus group work best when they're made up of either friends or strangers. Imagine you have a group of 5 people. If you have like 3 friends in there and 2 strangers, it might be that the 2 strangers are not talking at all. Finally, and this point is something we need to mention a lot, is like a central motif in the semester. Everything depends on the topic and the research question, right? So even if it will really depend on what kind of developments happen within your study and what the focus of your study is, where you choose the composition of your research, of your focus group. Then there's the idea of sample sizes. Now, the unit of data collection within focus groups is the focus group itself. Okay, so if you have 5 focus groups with 5 participants, you have 5 units of data. It's sort of it's not just a semantic issue. If you would do like 25 individual interviews, you would have 25 participants, right? That would be 25 units of data. If you want to publish your study, and you will see that a lot of studies who are published with focus group data in mind, they will tell you, okay, we did 5 focus groups and we had 30 participants or something like that. They don't mention the idea of units of data because sometimes it's helpful when you publish, specifically in some sort of positivist-oriented journals, to have larger numbers. But this is not a thing that qualitative researchers focus on too much. The sample size and all of these things will depend on the context of your study. Within focus groups, you usually don't have the same amount as you would do with individual interviews. And one sort of heuristic that is used very often, this comes from, I think, grounded theory approaches, is the idea of data saturation. Have you heard about data saturation before? So data saturation is a concept which sort of describes that it is sort of it's not a value, it's not a number, it's sort of a point within your data collection, a point within your data analysis where you have reached enough information that you won't get any hugely new perspectives, any hugely new concepts or ideas that are happening. I saw one description of data saturation. It was something like that you can almost predict what your participants will answer if you have done enough interviews, for example. And this is true to some extent. It really depends on, of course, the composition of your sample and how much difference you applied in the different situations. But the idea of data saturation is something that you will find a lot when it comes to sort of having an argument while we have so and so many people within a study. Now you have to think about the contextual idea of, for example, if you write an ethics proposal or you write a proposal for funding or something like that, sometimes you can't just say, or it really depends who is in the review committee. Sometimes you can't just say we will collect data until saturation is reached. So you will find some sort of comparable study from the literature and see how many people they included, and you will give an approximate number of how many people you want to include in the end. At least that's the way we do it. Like in my last ethics proposal, I said, okay, we will do something like data saturation. Then I explained data saturation. And then I was like, okay, these are 5 studies which are similar to my study. And they did like 50 interviews or whatever. So we are doing 60, whatever it might be. But this is the contextual idea around data saturation. Now, data saturation, again, is not a specific number where you know, okay, this is it. It's more like okay, this topic came up a lot in the last 10 interviews or in the last 10 focus groups or whatever. Now, it might be that we have enough data on this. Okay. There are different recommendations for focus group sizes. Usually, like the general idea is that you have at least 3 people. Now, I see a couple of studies that do sort of a, I don't know if they still call it focus group, so it's just 2 people and the interviewer. That will lead to a different dynamic, of course, if you have 2 people or more than 2 people. And they say you shouldn't have more than 8 people within your focus groups. You have advantages and disadvantages for each of these, and it will depend on your research question which one you choose. The advantage of a smaller group sometimes is that you generate more of a rich, more in-depth discussion, more level of detail in the discussion, more intricate arguments and thoughts in the discussion. It is easier to manage for sure, like in every way in terms of logistics. And they say it can be better for more sensitive topics. That could be the topics that we talked about before. Disadvantages is that you get less diverse viewpoints, of course, less people, less diverse viewpoint, but there's the point that you mentioned before of social pressure, that it might be that you, even in larger groups, get less diverse viewpoints because of social pressure. And if the participants are not engaged, the conversation may stutter or stop or whatever, become awkward in some sense, but this could happen even in larger groups. And in larger group, there's more risk of some sort of distress, but it's not just distress, it's the idea that you need to be more experienced to be able to manage a larger group and their responses. Okay. Yeah, let's answer this question. Let's say you make up a, you have to do a focus group because your topic tells you to. Would you do a larger group or a smaller group? What would you choose? Why would you choose it? And in which context maybe would you choose the larger group? In which context would you choose the smaller group? Thoughts on this? What are further advantages of smaller groups? What are further advantages of larger? Let's start with this first question. What are further advantages of smaller groups? Other than the ones we talked about. Why is a smaller focus group better? Yeah?
Maybe it's harder for a single person to exclude themselves in the discussion, since there are only 3 persons, and it's more obvious when they don't say anything. So you'd rather get information out of every individual, probably also without asking them specifically, but rather because it's also maybe social pressure then.
Mm-hmm. So they need to be more involved because there's more of a spotlight on them because there aren't that many people. Yeah, I see. It's a great point. There's not much for smaller ones. How about for bigger ones? What are the advantages of further advantages of larger focus groups? Are there any? Nothing? What could be of an advantage if you have a larger focus group? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. More perspective. That's the central one. That's the main one. To have more perspective, more viewpoint. That's the whole idea of focus groups in and of itself. Like compared to interviews or something, you want to have the more perspectives. However, only because you have more people doesn't mean that you will have more perspectives. It will a lot depend on the context that you are in, the way this whole thing is moderated, and a lot of other contextual factors as well. Now the second question here is a trick question, not really a trick question, but which one would you choose? A smaller or a larger focus group if you had to conduct the study with a focus group? Yeah?
I would rather go with many smaller focus groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because I think, as you already said, that you get more in-depth
Mm-hmm.
discussions, and I think you get more information out of it without knowing it really, but would be my assumption.
Mm-hmm. So more smaller groups.
Better control, I think,
Mm-hmm.
in cases, for example, when they go in a complete different direction, that you can stop it better and lead it anywhere else again.
Mm-hmm. Pragmatic decision because it's easier to control. Yeah. Would go for 20 large sample-sized focus groups. This is a trick question because in the end it depends, as so many things. It will depend on your research question and your topic, what you need to choose. And not only that, it will depend on your context. Sometimes even if you do an interview study, it can happen that it will become some sort of a focus groupish situation. I had that happen in a study where it was a little study in a company where we asked people about absenteeism and things like that at work. And some people didn't want to do an individual interview, but they want to do it in a group. So I was like, hey, let's do a focus group out of this thing. But it was a focus groupish situation rather than a focus group because it looked very similar to the video in the beginning where I was just asking questions, they responded, sort of, and then they were saying things like, oh, this is shitty, and I was like, what is shitty? And things like that. But that's due to my poor planning and not the fault of the participants. But yeah, it will depend on your research question, your philosophical position, your design in and of itself, and contextual considerations. A couple of ethics-related points. Now, these ethics-related points are related to not only focus groups, but any kind of research, any kind of qualitative research specifically, but I wanted to bring them up in this context. When we think about ethics, we need to think about it in a formal way, like what is it that, for example, the rules and regulations are about when it comes to ethics, but we also need to think about it in a more substantive way. What ethics might mean in the context of our study, not only in the context of law and regulation and what the ethics committee wants from us. But certain ethical issues are quite commonly mentioned when we think about focus groups, and these are withdrawal during data collection, after data collection, and confidentiality. It is very rare that you will have people within data collection that will withdraw their consent, for example, leave the group in the midst of the discussion or something like that. Same is for interviews as well. Both is very, very rare rather. Now, if it does happen, you will sort of stop the group for a couple of minutes, maybe tell them to take a little break, talk to the person afterwards, see if they are okay, make sure that they are okay. Let's say it's a very sensitive topic, for example. And after you checked if they are okay, then you tell them that it's no issue for them if they want to withdraw at this point, and it's totally fine. Now, if it happens after data collection, that's sort of more of an issue, but still, some ethics committees say it's impossible to withdraw after the data collection. So after the focus group, it is impossible to withdraw. Let's say you allow it within your study, you have it in your informed consent forms, then you need to have some sort of a plan for it, for sure. You need to have your contact details with them or something like that. They can send you an email or talk to you or whatever to withdraw the data afterwards. And it happens very often that then you lose the whole focus group. Like if you have a person, for example, that took part in the focus group, then afterwards withdrew their consent, you lose a lot of the interactive nature of the focus group. But it really depends on the situation, of course, because sometimes you will have a person who didn't talk so much or didn't talk at all sometimes, and they withdraw, then you might be able to keep the rest of the focus group. But if they contributed a lot, the interactive nature, different perspectives are very tough to put together afterwards if there's missing information from one participant. Whatever you do, you need to have it in your participant information sheet. And then there's the idea of confidentiality. This is again very important for groups where people know each other, but also for other groups as well. What is important here that you as a moderator or the person who is moderating needs to remind the participants to maintain confidentiality even after discussion, even 10 years later or whatever. You should mention this often and explicitly, and you should have that in writing too, of course. And then you can have some sort of information on, like, in which ways participants are allowed to talk about the focus group discussion. For example, it's not okay if you identify a person and where they work and what's their name or any kinds of these things, or their specific stories, share them, but it might be okay that you talk about generally about the topic or what the consensus among the group or something like that. But you need to explain this very often to your participants, maybe even at the recruitment stage. Talking about the specifics of conducting a focus group, this is quite similar to the way you do your interviews. Here you usually need a little bit more preparation. Again, an assistant might be helpful if you have the resources for this. But for focus groups, you can assume that everything will take longer, but this is maybe applicable to a lot of other things in life as well. You need to tell the participants at the recruitment stage how long you think the focus groups might take. This is very tough to sort of to have an estimate about this if you've never done a focus group before, and if it's the first focus group on a certain topic. Therefore, you need to add at least half an hour more, maybe an hour more to the maximum time, just to be sure. There are a lot of contextual stuff that can happen there. Your focus group guide is very similar to your interview guide, the interview guides that you write. You will have different kinds of categories that you try to capture. You will have to have certain clear and precise questions or other types of material where participants have to respond to. And it's very important that you only ask about one issue. The difference is that you want your questions not to be a question-answer thing, but you want your question more to be like something that you throw in and have people have an interaction about, like they have a general discussion about it, or any kinds of similar things, like a debate or something like that. You need some questions which sort of open up a conversation in a very good way, as much as possible. Now, for this little exercise, we are going to take, 3 minutes should be enough for this. Imagine you are doing a focus group on the topic of weight and obesity. How would you start your focus group guide? How would you open your focus group if you had to conduct a focus group on weight and obesity? Do that with your partner, maybe, the person sitting right next to you, and afterwards we'll collect what you got. Just a couple of introductory questions are fine here. Okay, let's take 3 minutes for this. All right. How are we doing question-wise? Find anything? Sort of? Yeah? What would you open the focus group discussion with? It was about weight and obesity, and you have something more specific, or not more specific. How would you open your focus group?
Ours was like pretty general.
Mm-hmm.
How do you view weight and obesity?
How do you view weight and obesity? Yeah? Just open with the most general thing.
Yeah. And then we also said, what role does weight play in your life?
Ooh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah?
We did similar, I would say. Well, what is your opinion on weight and obesity and how it is handled in this country?
Mm-hmm. Would you do 2 questions at once, or would you separate them?
That's a good question. I would probably merge them. Like, what is your opinion on how weight and obesity is handled in this country?
Okay.
So more on like the second part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else? Yeah.
What experience have shaped your views about weight and healthy living?
What was it? What experience?
Have shaped your views about weight and healthy living or obesity?
Okay. What experiences have shaped your views? Interesting. Experiential question. There's no right or wrong. Okay, there's wrong, but there's no right when it comes to these things. It's important that we have something more general and broad in the beginning, similar to what you would do in interviews, and maybe later get to the specifics or something like that. But you want to have easy softball questions in the beginning for people just to get used to talking. And after you have established the idea of talking within the group, then you can get to more complex ideas or questions. But try to keep it always one concept, one question, one thing. What would be a bad way to start it? From your viewpoint, how would you not start a focus group on weight and obesity? Yeah?
Maybe something like, why are you obese?
Why are you obese? Yeah, quite judgmental. I wouldn't open with judgment. Great point. Yeah, why are you obese? That's a great bad question. And specifically if you look at one person or something. Okay. Yeah, that would be a bad way. Another bad way would be to be completely off topic, to do something that has nothing to do with the topic. You still want them to talk, but you want them to talk about the topic itself. Judgment is bad. Singling out one person would be bad. Something like that. All right. Let's move on pretty quickly. So while it is possible to pilot to do pilot interviews with people that you know. It's always tougher to get like 5 people in the room than to do pilot something with them, depending on who your friend group is you would do a pilot focus group with. With interviews, it's always easier to find one person and talk to them and test out your interview guide. But you can get people, even if they are not of the same composition of your focus group, just to test out your focus group guide. Now, after conducting the first focus group, but after conducting every focus group, you should review your questions and see how they worked and if they worked or didn't work or things like that. And in some focus groups, you can use stimulus material. That is videos or photos or any kind of material that is not just questions or something like that or textual. You can use them as icebreakers. You can start with videos and just ask about general opinions or something like that. But you can also structure your focus group around these things. It makes it a bit more complicated logistically though. Here are the challenges that we talked about before. It is quite tough to organize focus groups. Yeah, it can be the most time consuming, but this again applies to a lot of different things as well. And it is important, as we mentioned before, because everything influences the answers and discussion and the dynamic, that you choose an appropriate location for your focus group. If you have a sensitive topic, you shouldn't do it in a open environment where there are a lot of people or something like that. But it should be also not something something completely closed off, or something like a room without any windows or anything like that where people feel uncomfortable talking or being there. You need to find the balance when it comes to location. And as with interviews, you should, if you have the resources, provide refreshments, provide food, things like that. That's just for the preparation. When you conduct your focus group, when you are in the middle of your focus group and your participants arrive, you can engage in a bit of small talk, because the first things that you say within a room, the first impression that you make, you can sort of set the atmosphere of the room and the energy of the room just by talking to people and being nice as much as possible. You can tell them like about the location, where the bathrooms are. You can tell them that they can sit wherever they want, or if you have a certain place for them, tell them about that. You can give them the participant information sheet again, and then you introduce participants to each other. Sometimes people do like icebreaker games, as you would do at the beginning of certain semesters or something like that. Sometimes you can do it without, depending on what you feel is most appropriate for your context. Yeah. And they mentioned this a lot actually, that you need to consider an assistant, because they can help you a lot with your logistics. If you include one, you need one in your ethics application, because if there's another person in the room, there are issues with potential issues with confidentiality and things like that. After you welcomed people, you will need to explain in very much detail what will happen in this focus group and how it will happen, what are sort of how long this whole thing goes and all things like that. You will sort of try to gain consent, like again, collect the demographic information and set up some sort of ground rules for the group. All of this should happen before you start recording, right? And what could be potential ground rules? It can be that your mobile phone should be switched off or silent. It can be that if you need to go to the bathroom, please and return quietly. It can be, or this is an important one, it's actually helpful if you frame the whole discussion like that beforehand, that people should talk to each other rather than just to you as the moderator or whoever the moderator is. Also important to say that there are no right or wrong answers. This can be helpful if you frame it like that. You can tell them that they should try to not talk over each other, but it will really depend on the topic. If we have something that is quite controversial and we have people who are not, and we have a heterogeneous group, this might be impossible. But it also makes your transcription impossible. So you as the moderator, whoever the moderator is, will have to sort of try to handle the situation as much as possible. And you mentioned like what happens if these rules are not followed, that you may interrupt the group or anything like that. Yeah, the challenge, this is just a quick side note, the challenge with the transcription of focus group data is that you have multiple speakers. Now, even if you do it with like software, you will notice that they will have a lot of issues with speakers recognition. Therefore, it can be helpful, it's not always helpful, that you sort of let participants introduce themselves, talk like slowly about a certain topic, but like separately talk about a certain topic, because later if you transcribe it, it might be easier for you to differentiate the different speakers. As we are talking about transcription, this is just a quick reminder, second grade improvement task is online, I mentioned this already. You will do the following in this grade improvement test. So you will do an interview, either a narrative interview or a semi-structured interview based on a topic that is provided on Moodle. You will do this interview with some of your fellow students or friends or parents or whoever. After you do this interview and you record this interview, you will transcribe the first 3 minutes of it. Okay, that's your second grade improvement task. Do an interview, so create an interview guide, ask the other person, and then do a transcript of the first couple of minutes, or maybe first 3 minutes, I think. But yeah, details available on Moodle for this one. Okay. What else do we have here? Okay. It's a very complex skill to have to be able to moderate a focus group. This is something that needs practice for sure. You can't expect to be very good of moderating a focus group within your first focus group. You need to sort of try it out yourself and maybe observe a experienced moderator before you do your first focus group. It's also helpful to read a lot about these issues that sometimes happen in focus groups and how to handle them. There are a lot of different things, a lot of different sort of reflection papers on this that you can find online of how people handle certain situations. They mention also how people handle certain situations within the focus groups. And it's important to understand that the job of the moderator is to facilitate the discussion, not control the discussion. So you're not trying to sort of, you're trying to steer the conversation in a certain way, but you are not trying to have a hold of everything that is said and every concept and things like that. There are different types of moderation styles, and depending on your research question, your study, and all the other things, you can choose either to be a passive moderator or an active moderator. It is important to be aware about yourself and what is helpful. It's helpful, like the things we talked about in the reflexivity session, is to have something maybe in writing afterwards, like a postscript or something like that. Maybe you have a diary going on, anything like that to test out your moderation, not to test out your moderation skills, but to reflect on your moderation skills afterwards. If you do something in writing, maybe you test it out beforehand in front of a mirror or something like that. All of these things are helpful to think about moderation. But the most important thing is do it often, practice it if you want to get better at it. At the end of your focus group should be like the end of your interview. This is always helpful to have always helpful in relation to the openness of qualitative research. Maybe there's something people wanted to share throughout the discussion or they expected that will come up. So you need to give them an opportunity to sort of bring this up with your last question. So your first question, very open, very general, try to get them to talk. Last question, is there anything else that you would like to share? Is there anything else that needs to be added? Something like that. Now, this is a closed question. You can try an open question as well. But this will sometimes depend on how much time you spend in your focus group and how much time you will have left. Afterwards, you thank all the participants, turn off the audio recorder, and then you ask people if they have any further questions or whatever it might be. You will find different kinds of personalities, different kinds of archetypes, different kind of characters are sometimes mentioned in the literature when it comes to difficult participants. One difficult participant would be an expert, a self-appointed expert, something like that. They would, let's say you talk about a certain topic and they will talk about this topic in a very analytical way. Maybe they will take over the conversation and mention that they know this because they did this and that in the past. And it might be that people take them, like the other people in the focus group take them as some sort of an expert, and they don't want to share their own opinions because they've heard that there's an expert in the group and they don't want to sort of challenge the expert. This can be managed by, for example, emphasizing that everyone has worthwhile opinions and other different ways, for example, how you handle a shy talker, which we'll talk about in a bit. A dominant talker, sometimes this is the same person, the expert and the dominant talker. It's just someone who prevents others from contributing. And there are different ways to handle this, and you will have to sort of try out different ways. One way would be non-verbal kinds of indications. For example, just not look at the person when they talk and things like that. Or asking other people instead of that person if you bring up a new topic, for example. Then you have the shy or quiet participant. This is someone you need to talk to, but not in a fake way like in the video in the beginning, where you just mentioned the name like here, Amy, we haven't heard from you on this. Do you have any thoughts to share? Try to be as authentic as possible with this. There's also bored or restless participants. Where you get those is when you, for example, if you have recruitment strategies with incentives, for example. If, for example, pay people to be part of the focus group. Maybe they are just there to get the money. And then they are there, bored, and just don't want to take part or anything like that. But you will use similar strategies like for a shy or quiet participant. Maybe you use their name, again, not in a fake way, and ask them about their views specifically. All right. That's how far we got with our focus groups. Do you have any questions about focus groups or any other kind of data collection? Because this is sort of the end of data collection for this semester. Sort of. Yeah.
I'm interested in why I usually like focus groups. Like, what was the reason?
Why I hate them? It's the logistics of it. It's the logistics of it and my past experiences with focus groups, which again, it's not the fault of focus groups in and of itself, but it's the fault of poor planning in my other studies, which weren't supposed to be about focus groups. And secondly, the logistics sounds like a nightmare. Like imagine trying to get like 5 people, same room, offer refreshments and stuff, and then people steer off on the conversation and you're like, oh God, how do I get them back there? Then you don't get them back and then you're like, oh, this whole 3 hours was for nothing. And then you have to transcribe this nothing. It's insane. So yeah, but it will depend on the research question, of course. If I have a research question where a focus group discussion might be the most important thing, I will do them, although I hate them. Yeah. Any other questions? Are we good? Just remember, tomorrow's classes, exercises will be online. Next week there are no classes. Good luck with your second grade improvement task. See you around. Bye-bye.